Hello, this is Dale at Persevere to Excel podcast. I'm super excited for this interview today. I have Basra Mohamed. Basra, how you doing?
Hi Dale, I'm doing well. A little chilly.
Oh, a little chilly. Yeah, it's like 9 degrees outside.
Feels like it.
It's wild. That's the New Hampshire weather. That is completely the New Hampshire weather. Well, I am super excited to have you today in our interview. And I would love to kind of get your feedback. Like, what's your favorite thing around this time of the year? You know, the holidays and it's cold and whatever. But I'm curious to know from your standpoint, what's your favorite thing?
So, I'm still getting used to winter after 7 years of living in New England. But I have to say, it's just that feeling of wanting, wanting to drink hot things and just being bundled up. I just love winter attire. I'm not gonna lie. Mm-hmm. It's my favorite because I'm always perpetually cold. I'm a cold person, so I just like sweaters and I don't know. It's just a happy time. It's cold. It's miserable outside, but it makes me feel happy in a way when I'm inside.
That's interesting. Yeah. So you say you like the winter outfits, right?
Yes.
That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Are you a scarf person or a jacket person?
I am obsessed with scarves. I own too many scarves. In fact, I can rock them, I think, one every day of the year.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So are you a type of person that love a scarf so much that you kind of rock them during spring or summer when it's not cold out?
Legit, I have been called out in the summertime by friends for having a scarf around my shoulders. And they're like, it's 75 degrees outside. And I go, what?
Oh, wow. But you just can't help it, right? If you have a cool scarf, why just keep it for winter?
Right. And I just feel like the styles of the scarves, the colors, it should be something that could be rocked, all year round.
100%. Well, if you are a scarf company out there and, you reach out to Basra and get some, maybe she can rep some of your scarves. Well, I'm super pumped that you're here today. We actually met a couple of years ago when I was doing some work in Concord with an organization called New African American. It's a nonprofit that focuses on helping African immigrants kind of assimilate and get the support that they need to be successful. And I remember when I got there, they were telling me different people to meet with. The organization was telling me different people to meet, and someone was like, "You got to meet Basra. She's awesome." And I was like, "Heck yeah, let me meet her." And then we ended up meeting, and you were involved with the different stuff that was happening with that program. But I'm curious to know from your standpoint, what made you get involved with that organization?
So I knew a couple of friends who were, by the way, one thing I enjoy about being on the board for New American Africans is the name. No one ever seems to be able to get it right.
Right. I was fumbling here. I was the New American African League of North America.
North America. We have gotten so many different names, and New African Americans is the one I hear the most.
Right.
Even our own board members would make that mistake.
Right.
But I knew a couple of friends of mine, were on the board, and I was, I practiced immigration law. I'm an immigrant myself, and in a place I lived in Concord for almost 4 years, and I lived in a place that was not really close to where immigrant populations are, but I could see shopping in different parts of the town and coming into contact indirectly with the immigrant refugee population. I could see there's some much needed representation, advocacy, and I thought that that would be a great thing to do, to give back to a community that I come from. It might not be in New Hampshire, but I do come from an African, immigrant community, and I feel like in New Hampshire, the African immigrant community needed, proper leadership. It needed, proper organization, someone to advocate for them. So I just thought, hey, this would be a great, organization to work for, and I really, enjoyed not work for, volunteer with. So I served on their board, and now we are actually part of ORIS, Organization for Immigrant and Refugee Success. So it's been a wonderful, organization in Concord.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And one of the things to me that, I came in as an interim director for a really short period of time. But one of the things that definitely excited me was the fact that, they had people that were actually from Africa that were part of the board. And another side of it was also it it was young people, right? So I was like, man, this is super cool, like to see this dynamic. So that's where we originally met, and then over the years we've been involved in different things, different committee presentation, and most recently the presentation that happened at a gallery regarding immigrants and refugee issues. But before we get to those other stuff, I would love to just learn a little bit about who you are and how did you how'd you end up here and how'd you end up in New Hampshire? So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I would describe my life in New Hampshire and how I ended up in New Hampshire as a totally random occurrence. And one of my favorite sayings, one of my favorite quotes is, if you want to make God laugh, make a plan.
Oh, wow. I like that.
I love that quote. And it humbles me because we're always out here, just saying, you know what, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. In 5 years, I'm going to, end up like, in this position and in this place. And you really never know because this life happens.
Right.
And that is essentially what happened for me. I ended up in New Hampshire, I want to say totally by accident. I come from Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee. My family immigrated from, East Africa. I was born in Somalia, and when my family immigrated to America, I was 9 years old, and we randomly ended up in Nashville, Tennessee. So I guess I have a thing for like random towns, and I always just wanted to, live in the New England area.
Right.
It's just like
before you move on, can you just tell me a little bit about Tennessee? I've never been to Tennessee,
you have to go.
And like everyone I meet, they're like, "Dude, Tennessee is the spot." Like the Memphis area, and so
you would love
tell me a little bit about that. As a 9-year-old, like moving into Tennessee, how was that like?
Completely strange, completely strange, but I think so. Nashville is actually an up and coming town right now. It's
okay.
Like I visit once or twice a year, and even I feel like an outsider whenever I go.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, my dad actually gives me a tour every time I go because it's that different. Every year it's developing, and there are more, more and more businesses. More, it's just so crowded right now. But it wasn't like that when I, late '90s when my family immigrated, and it was totally different. But I think, it was from what from where I came from in East Africa. It was like the climate, of course, being, I remember when we came, it was around winter, and it was cold, and seeing like dust of like snow, and not being used to that. Of course, those like differences. But what I grew up in a large immigrant community, and
right.
We have so many. Nashville is very diverse. By the way, you will love Memphis.
I gotta go.
I
gotta go and
you
visit.
will love Memphis. We have just, I love Tennessee. Like, it's so beautiful. We're humongous, but I mean, where Nashville is situated, like you're not too far away from Alabama. Not that you'll have any reason to go there, or
maybe.
Kentucky.
You
just never know with life.
Right.
Remember, but like the way where we're situated, we're only 4 hours away from Atlanta. So there's always a lot of things to do if you want to be in the area. Memphis is of course known for blues and barbecue, and Nashville, we have hot fried chicken, best fried chicken, hands down, and country music. And you know what? Fun fact, by the way, people just think that a lot of the recording industries in Nashville are all country music, but a lot of other non-country genres of music actually come and record there.
Oh wow!
As well, yeah. So people don't know that, but it's becoming very artsy, and you would really love it there. It's very like hip, fresh. Love Nashville, but it was. I think where I lucked out, and where I feel the difference is about if my family immigrated to New Hampshire, it would have been very different for me in that I grew up with Africans of all different ethnicities. It was, there's a large Ethiopian population, Sudanese population, Somali population, Kurdish population, Middle Eastern, a lot of like North Africans there, Egyptians there. So I just grew up in little immigrant, communities, and I never felt that, I was an outsider. Nashville is a very interesting, it's very melting pot, and Nashville has a lot of transplants. A lot of the people that, live in Nashville are usually from somewhere else. They're like moving in from a different, state or country, etc. So that really helped me. I grew up in a very like diverse background, and I didn't really, I really didn't realize. Even I went to for college. I went to Middle Tennessee State. Shout out, in
Oop, oop.
whoop, whoop, right in a little rural, what used to be a rural town, and now it's not. It's Murfreesboro, Tennessee is also like popping now because it's about 30 minutes away from Nashville.
Right.
And even then, I honestly didn't, I never thought of myself as being, even in hindsight, looking back right now and realizing that it was always, in some of my classes, I was, the only black kid, the only black student or Muslim, student, was covered up. And so it never really hit me that I was in some of the pockets whenever I stepped out of the immigrant communities, I never felt that I was an outsider.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
think that has something to do with like the Southern hospitality of people just making you feel comfortable. I just never felt, I had
So
friends
you always felt welcome.
I always felt welcomed. And that's like the one thing, if you stop any immigrant in Nashville, that's, I believe, one thing that they would tell you is just, you just don't feel like an outsider. And I remember growing, the towns that, the neighborhoods that I grew up in, you'll see an entire, like it's a huge boulevard or road and full of immigrant businesses.
Wow.
Of like African businesses, Middle Eastern businesses, Hispanic businesses. So, it's just so much diversity that people up here actually don't realize how diversity the South is really in a place like Nashville. So I never really felt like an outsider, to be honest, because I was surrounded by, diversity, even when I was not in diverse, pockets.
And sorry for cutting you off. I do want to unpack that a little bit. What do you think like led to people being able to actually create their own businesses? Like I'm not saying that you're an expert on around what happened, but I'm kind of curious on that because that mobility is like it's always a big driver for people to stay, right? Because
Right,
a lot of
yeah.
immigrants, they come in, they stay in one place, and then they move on to other places where
Right.
opportunities are. And
Yeah.
I can imagine having your own business is
Yeah.
a thing that will make you like stick around for a while.
Right. I honestly think it's the economic opportunities and, people having that sense of belonging and that, they feel that they are Nashvillians. They feel that they, something that I honestly don't really see in New Hampshire, in the immigrant communities necessarily in New Hampshire, but I think we have better economic, like a better economic structure. I think also politics has something to do with it. Nashville is a pretty blue city for, a city that's in a very, red state.
Right, right.
Nashville and Memphis are. And so, I honestly think it's, also the climate, I would say, is another thing that helps people because
Weather.
The weather, yeah,
Right.
it tends to be a lot warmer, so people can compare that to where they come from. So I think it's a host of factors. It's bigger, so bigger than like Concord or Manchester, so better maybe lending lending opportunities from banks.
Right.
So I remember. And I'm just gonna, just as a little culture shock, I have never seen a white taxi driver until I came to New Hampshire.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because all the taxi drivers I grew up with are, like taking taxis in Tennessee were all immigrants.
Oh.
And I remember one time, I called, it was twice that I called, and I was like, oh my God, this is the first time I'm seeing a white taxi driver, because that was the norm for me growing
Right,
up in
growing up in
Nashville.
Nashville, right.
Yeah, so I honestly think, given all those factors, it made it easier, and actually the cost of living at that time, Nashville tends to be a little bit more expensive right now, was very affordable. So we don't have any income tax like New Hampshire. In Tennessee, we don't have income tax. We only have sales tax and property taxes.
Okay.
So that also, incentivizes, a lot of people to, have businesses. And especially, I think what was very interesting to me is like you would walk into stores where the owners don't necessarily speak English. Whether they're Hispanic or African, they don't speak English, but here they are running,
Their own businesses, right.
which is very, remarkable if you think about it. So I think I drifted off from your question.
No, that was great. I am curious to know a little bit, like so from the evolution of your growing and developing and moving forward, right?
Yeah.
So it's like your family moved there when you were 9 years old, and then you find a community, even though it's a new community, you find it to be a very welcoming community where you see yourself in a, there's other people from different places that are there, even most taxi drivers that you engage with were from different countries. So I'm curious, and then you say, you ended up going to college, and
Yeah. Oh,
that was locally, right?
Yeah, I went to college locally in Tennessee, and then made my way up here because I always, and that's I think where we left the question you asked me earlier. I always wanted to be in the New England area, just something different. Politically, I aligned with how. New England, states are perceived in other parts, of the country.
Right.
So I really wanted a different experience, outside of the South, being there most of my life. And so I end up in, indirectly in New Hampshire.
Right.
Yeah, I was looking in the, around the Boston area, but I honestly, just so long as I was in the area, I didn't, like I was, Boston adjacent. It was fine. Ended up and went to UNH Law. And I have to say, like when I moving up here, it was a complete culture shock for me. And I have to point out, as my parents also pointed out at one point, is that coming from the South and it's the Bible Belt, we actually have towns that are dry towns, so which means no alcohol.
Right.
So it was it was a culture shock seeing like the state alcohol stores, like the liquor stores on the highway, and just being just confused that, oh my God, there's a liquor store on the highway.
Yeah, that's New Hampshire.
That's New Hampshire. And the college I went to was actually a state school at Middle Tennessee State University. And it was actually a dry campus. So,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a dry campus. And if Southern, schools, especially state schools, were big on like cookouts.
Right,
and,
jamborees.
exactly,
right.
for football. Tailgating for football and everything. So that was just a culture shock for me, and then of course other cultures, other little things, just I would never forget. I had orientation. I moved in and I had orientation at the law school, and I'm walking back from orientation and I see the mailman walking and like delivering mail. And I was just very chipper. And I go, "Hi, how are you?" And he just looked at me like looked at me.
We don't do that here.
Yeah,
She's saying hi to me,
right? Like he just looked at me like, "Do I owe you money or something?" Why are you this chipper to see me? Okay, and I remember going, "Huh, okay." And then I slowly picked up on the atmosphere here, and it's different.
It's a little different,
yeah, it's
right?
a little different. And I just remember. I lived near the law school in Concord, UNH Law School. So it was, suburbia, very white. Very rarely you'll run into, like people of color. And I remember I used to go to the Walmart in Concord, down on Loudon Street.
Yep.
And I remember
on the other side of the
on
bridge.
the other side of the bridge, and that's when you see the different colors, of people. And I remember I used to stop, and it used to break my heart in the wintertime when I would see whether they were Nepali or Bhutanese or Congolese, and they're like dragging groceries in wearing their traditional clothing,
Right.
barely like covered up from the cold, and walking to Walmart. And I used to be that creeper where, please don't tell my dad this. I would stop and I'll offer rides,
Right.
something that he is legitimately terrified. He's
Right.
convinced this is how I'm going to go. Someone is going to snatch me because I'm always stopping for strangers. And I will stop and offer people rides. And
Did they take the rides?
A few of them, yes.
Yeah.
A few of them, like especially if they're African and they see me, and and I'm like, "Hi." And back when they see the hijab, when I had my hijab, and they'll see the hijab, and if it was like Somali immigrants, especially, and they're like, "Oh, okay, this is one of us,"
Yeah.
and
That
they'll
connection was
that
there, right? It
connection
felt
was, it was very comfortable.
It's very interesting that you say that in terms of, so when I was growing up in Manchester, I remember early on when we didn't have a vehicle, and even though the store was fairly close to where we lived, I had to sometimes, we at the time there was this food chain called Vista Food. My mom, we would go buy food and we have to push the cart, and and even now as an adult, like it humbles me a lot when I think about that, because I'm like, man, like that's all we had. That was our starting point. So luckily, like we lived less than a mile away from the grocery store. But I remember at times, people would look out and be like, "Hey, what's going on?" So it's just part of that evolution. It's like when you start off from scratch in a new space, sometimes you don't have the end meets to get to where you need to be. So you have to you got to use whatever resources you have. And for a lot of immigrants, walking is kind of that transportation for them. So you experienced a lot of that in Concord, as you said. I am curious to know a little bit more about what led to like you wanting to go to law school. Like what obviously you excelled in your learning to be able to go to college, graduate with your undergrad, and you wanting to continue on in law school. Like, what influenced that? What was the thing for you?
So I have, if you ask my mom, it's the fact that I always argue over everything, argumentative. And in Somali, she used to say, "Oh, you talk so much, you make me thirsty." Okay, now I have to, like, can you be quiet? And so when I was graduating from law school, she goes, "I knew it because you always talk too much." This is how I
Right.
knew. But for me, it was social justice issues. I was always like politically active since high school. I used to do debates and stuff in high school, and that allowed me to, do research and, stay informed on social political issues, economic issues. And so coming out of, high school, I knew I wanted to do political science. I did political science. I studied political science in college, and I lived in DC for a bit, just try to see how the government system and how everything works together. And I knew naturally for me to be as effective as I can be, I would need to get a law degree and make sure that I do the best I can helping contribute to humanity. I knew that if I I could go get my master's, get my PhD and teach, or do something else. But having my mom is right. I love to talk, but I'm also very compassionate about, hence why I work for a nonprofit and I do what I do in immigration. But I always, wanted to be part of the change that I wanted the world to, have.
Right.
So, I hate when people complain about things, and I feel like so far in, the past few years, ever since the current administration, a lot of what we do is we complain. We just complain. No one wants to get up and do something about it.
Right. No one's trying to solution. People are spending more of their
Exactly.
time just complaining and whining
Exactly.
about what they
Yeah.
don't like.
Exactly. And like with social media, it has really honestly made it so much easier for us to be lazy and just I tweeted. There I go. I did something. I
Right.
tweeted against the president or I tweeted against Nancy Pelosi, and I've done my part. But often the change that we want to see needs to come from us. So
Right.
I knew I wanted to go to law school in order for me to be effective. So I went to law school, and here I am.
That's awesome. So my follow-up question to that is, now that it sounds like you've taken the different pathways that you needed to take in order to get to where you are now. Now that you've been, you got your law degree and you're practicing law currently. What has that experience been like for you personally when you look at putting in the hard work to get to where you are now, and now that you're here, what has that experience has been like for you personally in terms of like what you're discovering, what you're learning, and the forward movement that you're continuing to make?
Humbling, like very, very humbling. Because at the time, I know my family went through the immigration legal system, and I was a kid. I was 9, so a lot of that I was sheltered away from. So I just knew that they were. I remember my mom working like 3 different jobs. In order to afford
Grinding it out.
grinding it out. My parents doing odd, work just to make sure, and they could afford paying, attorney fees and make sure that we have, work authorizations and socials, et cetera, so that way we could have a better life in America.
100%.
And so, for me, it's humbling, and just to see, especially the type of clients that I work with, it's very humbling to see, knowing my family went through this, and I'm very grateful. It makes me very grateful, and I feel I often find myself. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or I'm doing this for a long time, but I do a lot of reflection. I catch myself doing a lot of self-reflection, and wow, coming from being a Somali immigrant, coming from like really destitute essentially, being very poor, and where I am right now and being in that position that now I can help turn that around and pay it forward, and making sure that I impact the lives of immigrants is very rewarding. Is the other word that I would say. It's very rewarding.
And you said something that I want to kind of echo a little bit around that self-reflection. That self-reflection is so important, because a lot of times when you have that forward movement, like you focus on the forward movement so much that you forget about where you came from and where you were before that, and the reflection really helps you to stay grounded. And for me personally, like that reflection is everything. It's everything to me. It doesn't mean that like I'm still using kind of what my past experiences was in terms of where I am now, but it's keeping me grounded. It's reminding me, hey, this is what the journey that you took. This is what the journey that your family took in order to be here. And I think for me personally, it gives me a different grind. Like I'm willing to, I think I focus more on the meaningful things, right? Like where I'm like, okay, what's meaningful for me, and what, in result of that, that drives my action, regardless if it's not, like materialistic, compensation that where I'm like, oh, if I get this, or even notoriety. I think a lot of times when you're, a lot younger and you're trying to find your voice, and we look for that recognition. And I think for me, I've gotten to a point where I can really care less about the recognition, because I believe that the impact is more important. Because a lot of times, that's where the rubber hits the road, right? It's like, so what did you do? How did you contribute to that? What are you involved with regarding that particular thing? So thank you for sharing that, because that reflection piece is like, it's so important.
Yeah. And I always say, I can't remember who said this. It might be Aristotle. It's another quote that I like, and I'm probably going to butcher it. But a life worth like questioning and like pondering over, like your actions and what you're doing is not really a life worth living, right? Are you just going to wake up every day, just do the same grind, just get up, go to work, not think about your actions? So I know I butchered that saying.
But that sounded
that
awesome.
Quote.
That sounded
Thank you. But it's something that I, swear by, and honestly I feel like it got me to where I am. So I'm like, okay, so what is the end goal? It's not just about the end goal, but okay, I know what the end goal is, but you have your goals set, but what is the meaning of what I'm doing right now? What have I achieved? Am I okay with what I achieved today? Am I okay with what I'm going to do tomorrow? And I feel like so far I feel like in our economic system right now, people are all about, especially if you're outside of the 1%.
right.
It's all about the grind and surviving and trying to pay the bills and, putting food on your, family's table. But so, I also don't want to sound a little too, out of touch by saying, oh, these people are not really living. But
Right.
I honestly cannot say this enough, that I wish more and more people did that, because then they would realize how, just our little things that are insignificant in the day, that just get in the way of how we think, that negativity, or, because sometimes someone can just cut you off in traffic, and
Right.
you don't think about the big picture. You just get upset. It ruins your entire day. Okay? But I think the more reflection we do, the more we come to terms with humanity, the more we come to terms with, certain situations in our lives, and or we want to change certain situations in our life and our society and our communities. And, it will allow people to, in a way, become better citizens and better members of in their communities. So highly, highly support that.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, we're coming towards the end of our interview here, and so much to unpack. But the focus for my podcast is around persevere to excel. Right, you gotta persevere. You gotta kind of grind it out in order to get to the other side. So for some of my listeners and people that might be listening and watching this, that are in that stage where they need to continue to press on and press through, what would you say to them?
I would say the first place to start is gratitude. And it's honestly something that, it sounds very hippie-ish, but it's something that I've actually been working on in the past year that really helped me. And like I said earlier, I don't know, I've been doing a lot of reflection lately. I don't know if it's because I'm, getting older. Maybe that has something to do with it. But the reason why I say gratitude is, I think, when you show gratitude, and gratitude can be in the most basic level of things. People think, we only we're happy and we show gratefulness when we get something big. I got that
Right.
job. Thank you, God. Thank you.
Result oriented.
Exactly. Brilliantly put. It's like result oriented. It's like, oh, I got my first house, or I got my car, I got my job. But we never really think about the little things. Okay. Today I woke up. I'm grateful for that. We often think about, for instance, oh, I can't believe I have to go to work today. How about I'm grateful I have a job to go to that helps me pay my bills. So I think, gratitude is very important. And, for, people who need that push and who just, want to go out there and get their life, I would say, honestly, start off with gratitude. start basic. I'm glad I have, one of my favorite things to do is when I wake up in the morning, I like to say, 5 things I'm grateful for. Okay? And it helps me start my day. And this is why if I work out of 2 offices in Manchester and in Nashville. And if you ask any of my colleagues, I'm always like chipper. They've never seen me like down.
Right,
and
right.
I think it's also, partly just who I am. But I honestly find that helps me so much. And I think especially when you come from, and this is really, for my fellow immigrant, community, out there, especially if you're younger and you're trying to figure out this thing called life.
Right.
Life has not been easy for us and will not be easy for us. And you're just waking up and you catch yourself in this, the monotonous of life. I would say reflect a lot more, show gratitude, because by showing gratitude, it allows you to see like a lot of things that you have that someone out there does not have, someone else out there does not have. Someone might have millions that you don't have, but they might not have the health you have, for
Exactly.
instance, right?
Right.
So I think by making a list of the things you're grateful for, checking it twice, tea is the season.
Wow.
I went there.
That's pretty good.
Right?
That's pretty good.
Worked that into it. And show it will allow them to get the clarity they need, and have a clear clarity in their vision.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being in this interview with me and being able to share your perspective. And like you said, keep yourself grounded. So here's a theme that what I got out of being reflectful, creating the space to reflect, and being grateful and having gratitude, accepting where you are, being present, right?
Yes,
taking
live
every
in the
little thing
moment.
not for granted. So thank you so much, Basra, for being in this interview, and I appreciate you coming
Thank
through.
you. Lovely.